Good evening, and as Nate said, my name is Ellen Moore. I'm in the Scholar class of 2026, and my research was over reforming adoption and how international and US policies have adapted to past failures in modern realities. So my presentation is going to start off with an interactive part, where I'm going to put this image on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you've ever heard or seen of these organizations. So the first one is this image. So have any of y'all seen this one? Okay, a few of y'all. Well, this is the Hague Conventions on International Adoption, and I will define what all of these mean in the next slide. Have any of y'all seen this? Okay, more of y'all, perfect. Well, this is the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. And this last image is fairly underground, and I don't really know if any of y'all have seen it before, but have any of y'all seen this? Okay, none of us, great. Well, obviously all of us know what the United States of America is because we're in it right now, but what does it have to do with the Hague Conventions on International Adoption, or UNICEF? Well, they can all agree that adoption is a lifeline, and how governments and people go about this can shape a child's life forever. Now, as promised, I'm going to define what all of these organizations do and how they're involved in adoption. Well, the Hague Convention on International Adoption is primarily focused on international adoption, and it focuses on reforming government policies and regulations in order to protect children. Well, UNICEF is different because it doesn't focus primarily on adoption, but it also creates its own opportunities to help protect children. And finally, the United States adoption system, it focuses on international and national adoption from a US citizen, and it focuses on, similarly to the Hague Convention, on policies and government regulation to protect children. Well, because they have that similarity on focusing on government regulations, I'd like to compare the two and their foundations within adoption. So the Hague Convention on International Adoption, their top priority is to preserve the rights, identity, and information of every child that goes through them. So their natural rights, the cultural identity that they have established in their home country, and their information. So whether or not they're adopted in the first place, where they're from, and maybe even who their parents are in the future. But they also address the risks of adoption, such as human trafficking and illegal adoptions. So illegal adoptions could be adopting a child through illegal documents, which could end up in human trafficking. But this risk calls for a necessity for thorough adoptions. So thorough home interviews of prospective parents, interviews in general, background checks, all to ensure that the child is kept safe through this adoption. Now, the United States adoption system has seen a recent decline in international adoptions, as you can see in the graph in the bottom right corner of the screen. And this is due to a number of reasons, such as countries closing their doors to adoption, such as Russia and China, or the recent COVID-19 pandemic, where countries didn't just shut down their adoption systems, but they shut down their countries in the first place. Now, the Child Citizenship Act of 2000 and the Equal Citizen Children Act of 2023 are two policies that I would like to focus on tonight. Now, the first one granted immediate citizenship to children who are adopted through the United States and through the Hague Convention, but they didn't acquire or allocate for children who were adopted while they were still a child and then had turned into a legal adult by the time this act came out. And this is what the Equal Citizenship for Children Act did in 2023, was covered that gap of children who weren't granted immediate citizenship because they were already legal adults. Now, similarly to the Hague Convention on International Adoption, they focus on consent, eligibility, and child welfare. And so the consent of biological parents, the eligibility of prospective parents, and just to make sure that the child's welfare is kept of the utmost importance. Now, another thing about the United States adoption system is the USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, any adoption will go through these services to make sure that the child is granted citizenship and is allowed into the nation. Now, it is also important to look into modern events and how they shape these conventions and how they shape the adoption system for the world. So the Hague Convention on International Adoptions addresses the 2004 Southeast Asia tsunami. So thousands of children were left without homes and without families after this disaster. And so waves of American families rushed to Southeast Asia to adopt these children and to help rescue them. But it turns out that these children were only temporarily misplaced, meaning they had families living or they had relatives they could move in with. So the Hague Convention stressed the importance of a consistent international policy system so that disasters like these and legal issues do not happen in the future. Well, as I mentioned earlier, UNICEF does not only focus on adoption, but they do create their own opportunities to help children. So they warned Iraq about their poor education system because there's a high number of dropouts of school in elementary school alone. So they warned that this is their future generation and they need to prioritize their education. But imagine a child with a family and with a support system going through a bad education system. Well, now imagine a child with no family and no support system going through that same system. It could ruin their future. And they also aid children in the Israel and Gaza conflict, sending trucks of food, supplies, and clothing to these children stuck in war-torn areas. And this also just emphasizes that UNICEF is going to protect children regardless of politics. And you might be wondering, why is this important? Why does this matter to me? Well, personally it matters because, as Nate said, my youngest brother is adopted from China through a legal and safe adoption. And without these conventions and policies in place, I would not have my brother today. But why does this matter to y'all? Well, this isn't me asking you to go and adopt every child you can and bring them all into your home, because that's nearly impossible. But it is just to recognize that there are 30 million children in the adoption system without families, and just to realize that we need to help. Jesus commands us to care for the children and the orphans, and so we need to follow his word and help those in need. Thank you so much, and have a great night.